Hi, I'm Mike Sandifer from Northwest School of Fly Fishing, and welcome to the world of drop shot nymphing. Drop shot nymphing is two things. It's an extraordinarily effective method in delivering your flies or your nymphs down to the target zone every single time, every single cast. The other thing about drop shot nymphing is it's a lot of fun. So this is an extensive two-part series on drop shot nymphing. So the first video will take you in the classroom where we design all the leaders and the knots we use and how we do it. And the second volume or into the series is I'm actually on the water with you, showing how we actually do this on the water. So sit back, enjoy these videos, and please subscribe to Northwest School Fly Fishing channel.
Hello, welcome to Northwest School of Fly Fishing, Virtual Fly Fishing Academy. Today we're going to talk about drop shot nymphing, and in volume 1 of drop shot nymphing we're going to be designing leaders and telling you how all this is put together. Welcome to Northwest School Fly Fishing, Virtual Fly Fishing Academy. Today we're going to talk about drop shot nymphing and how we make our leaders, how effective this is. And for a lot of details of what we do here at Northwest School Fly Fishing, Virtual Fly Fishing Academy, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram. Nymphing, you have to be able to nymph fish if you're going to fly fish correctly. Fly fishing is two things: it's surface and subsurface. So when the trout make their presence known on the surface, we're obviously dry fly fishing. But when on a tailwater river and we don't see a lot of fish rising, we want to have the option of going down and getting them. The fish are on the bottom, and that's what we call nymphing. And there are many forms of nymphing. There's a lot of the Euro styles of nymphing: Polish nymphing, Czech nymphing, French nymphing, and so on. It can get complicated for a lot of folks. And then there's American style of nymphing, which is high stick nymphing, straight line nymphing, classic nymphing, strike indicator nymphing. But by far the most effective form of nymphing there is the drop shot nymphing techniques. Drop shot nymphing is an American style of nymphing, and it's by far probably the deadliest form of nymphing that is available to the angler today. Drop shot nymphing is different than any other style of nymphing in that our flies are at an angle. As you look on the diagram here, your flies are at a diagram or at an angle, and the fish are seeing multiple flies at depth, with the lead being at the bottom or at the end of our leader, versus the other style where the lead was in front and our flies are dragging on the bottom. You almost never lose flies in drop shot nymphing because our flies aren't on the bottom. Drop shot nymphing is a form of nymphing that allows you to be really in tune with you and the trout, and it will let's see, if I say this correctly, it's more of a functional way of fly fishing in the sense that it's a touch, it's a feel, it's cerebral. You're really into what you're doing versus say classic nymphing or high stick nymphing, where you're just bringing the fly through. So when we talk about drop shot nymphing, it is a deadly form of nymphing. In some rivers, it's not even legal to do. But we can do it here in the States. Lead is legal in America. Strike indicators are legal in America, and for most part, all our rivers are free here in America. So to really understand drop shot nymphing, we have to take you all the way to how we construct the leaders. And then in volume 2, we'll talk about how we do this on the river, so you can actually see how it's done in the river, the techniques we use and strategies we use for presenting our flies throughout the drift, the cast, and all those things will take you down to the river and show you. However, it begins in the classroom. It begins with understanding how we build these leaders. You're only going to be as effective as the leader that you build. and there's a certain amount of knots that you have to know. You need to know how to tie a perfection loop. You need to know how to tie a triple surgeon's knot. There's two different ways that I'll show you how to build a drop shot leader. But really, in reality, there's lots of ways to build a drop shot leader. But simplicity is really what I strive for. And we'll show you those two different styles, and you can choose which one you like the best. One of the critics of drop shot nymphing is changing flies. It's difficult to change flies. Well, it's really not. It's easier to change flies in drop shot nymphing than it is in regular nymphing. And in Euro style nymphing, the flies are weighted. They're expensive. You know, they're anywhere from $4 to $6 a fly. You can't find them anywhere. You got to buy them on the internet. And in reality, we're, as fly anglers, we're just trying to imitate the aquatic insects that are on the bottom. And to develop another fly that doesn't match what's on the bottom doesn't make sense to a lot of folks. So the reality is you can use any fly you want to in drop shot nymphing, as long as you understand the concept of leaders. Now, there's different styles of nymphing out there. What they all have in common are basically two things. The cast is the same. It doesn't matter if you're check nymphing, classic nymphing. It doesn't matter if you're strike indicator nymphing, any style of nymphing you want to. What all of them have in common is the flies have to be down where the fish are, and the cast is identical. So we start with understanding how we build these leaders, how they work underwater, and the types of flies that we're going to use on them, and how we build and construct and change flies when we're on the river. Okay, now let's talk about leaders. What separates all forms of nymph fishing are the leaders. And by far, the drop shot system we really relies heavily on the leader. And understanding leaders and how we construct them and how we build them and how we use them is number one. So let's take a look at leaders. What we do with leaders is they're just a set of knots. And you need to know what these knots are. So it's a very simple form. It's very easy to do. We start out with a 6-pound fluorocarbon. You can buy this at any sporting goods store. You can get 250 feet for, I don't know, $6, $7, $8, and it's certainly less expensive than buying 25 yards of tippet at your local fly shop. That's how we're going to begin. And the whole leader is built on this 6-pound fluorocarbon. All our droppers, the leader itself, everything is 6 pounds. So this is step one. Step two is we need to take off 3 sections of this fluorocarbon. We need a 7-foot long piece, and we need 2 24-inch pieces, as you see on the board here. So I'll demonstrate that with some of this nylon cordage I have here. And what I have here is a 7-foot section. So what we're going to do to start out with in the 7-foot section is we're going to tie at the very end a perfection loop. Now that perfection loop that we have on here is going to allow us to take on or take off our leader as we so fit, or we can change leaders. We can add a new leader. But to start with, we want to start the perfection loop, and that's going to begin our construction. Now at 30 inches, right about 30 inches, we're going to tie in our first section of monofilament, and we want to take a 24-inch piece, as I have here in cordage, a 24-inch long section of the 6-pound fluorocarbon. We want to take that and pinch it in half, just like that. And then we have the 30-inch piece like this. We take the 2 pinches together and we tie a triple surgeon's knot. So if you know how to tie a surgeon's knot, we know a surgeon's knot is tied basically an inline overhand knot twice. That's a double surgeon's. On a drop shot rig, we want to go 3 times. And that's going to give you the triple surgeon's knot. Just like that. We tie that tight. And we have our first tag tied to our leader. So we have a perfection loop by 30 inches down. We tie in our first tag. We go 10 inches down from there, and you can just eyeball this. We go down 10 inches down from there, and we tie in another 24-inch tag. We put it inline or loop-to-loop right there, and we tie in another triple surgeon's knot. And now we have the complete leader. We have a 7-foot piece of 6 or 8 pound fluorocarbon. We have two 24-inch pieces of the same fluorocarbon, and we've tied them onto the main leader right here, 10 inches apart, two 24-inch pieces of monofilament. Now, I'm going to show you two ways to do this. So this is the first way. Okay, now at this point we take the loop and we raise it up. And when you look at this system here, you're going to see one tag in kind of looping up and down, and one coming down. And the same on the bottom, one coming up and one coming down. What we're going to do is we're going to cut the one that's going down off on each of the knots. And that's going to look like that. So now we have a 12-inch piece tag in hanging down, a 12-inch piece of tag in hanging down, and the rest of the leader right here. Now, according to our chart right here, we have the first fly to the second fly is 10 inches. There you have it. And we have enough room left over if we want to put a third fly in on an inline fly. An inline fly is a fly that's tied inline on to the leader. So as I can demonstrate here with this fly, I've now tied an inline fly. So what we've done, we've created two dropper flies and an inline fly. Having the long leader allows you to add a third or even maybe a fourth fly where that may be legal. Now this is all moving in front of the trout. So having that extra line left over gives you the option to add a third fly on if you wish. And when you're fishing stoneflies or large flies, you want to have it on inline. If you have a large fly that's on a dropper, it has a tendency to weight down and wrap around. So we want our inline fly down here where it's not going to get tangled up. Now we have 10 inches in between, and our flies are going to be tied on at 4 inches. And that's going to, the difference between the two, you're not going to have your flies tangling together. Now, from our second dropper, we go down 8 inches and we're going to put on our lead. That's where we snap on our split shot lead. And that's going to give us the angle that we need going through the water like this. Once we put our lead on at 8 inches, we want to allow ourselves at least 3 inches, and then you can cut this off. Now the second way that you can develop your drop shot rig is to not have a tag at all, and some anglers prefer that. We can just cut the tags off both knots, and all that's left is two triple surgeons. And then we add our flies onto that. And how we do that is with a loop-to-loop. Not only is this how we add flies onto our leader, but it's how we change flies while we're on the water. So what we do is we have to have a perfection loop and a small piece of monofilament or tippet to do that. So if I want to add a fly, or I want to change flies in the drop shot nymphing, it requires that you pre-tie or on the stream have tied up, or on the stream tie up your fly. And how we do that is we tie the fly on first. So a lot of folks will tell you to make pre-tied loops, and all you have to do is tie your fly on. Well, I'm not going to teach you that because all knots stretch, and we're trying to get a fly on a 4-inch dropper. And if you tie the loop first and whip it out of your vest and you have this pre-tied loop, you go to tie on a fly, next thing you know, that fly is, when you tighten that fly in, it tightens up to an 8-inch tag. So how we do that is we tie that 4-inch tag. How we do it is we tie the fly on first. And I'll just signify that right quick by doing a quick little. Now in the field, I've tied my fly on. There it is. But I have no way of tying it on my leader, so I have to tie the loop on at 4 inches. This is what I'm talking about. It's a lot easier to tie a loop on at 4 inches than it is to tie the fly on at 4 inches. So if I want to tie the fly on at 4 inches, when I go to pull it tight, a lot of times it won't tighten up to 4 inches, it'll tighten up to 8 inches. And that's when you got this big tag hanging down. So if we tie the fly on first and then put the loop on, the loop won't stretch and you'll have that 4-inch tag. And the loop that we use is that perfection loop again. And there's that 4-inch tag. So for more information on knot tying, we do have a video available on the 6 basic knots in fly fishing on Northwest School of Fly Fishing, and you'll find it there. Now we're ready to change flies. There you have it. Now you just do a loop-to-loop, and I can't really do that with that big fly, so I'll just do it another way. I'll tie another perfection loop. You can see me do that. And there it is, and we can come down here and tie another loop, another perfection loop, like that. And if this works out right, one's our perfection loop and one would be our fly. We would simply come to our leader, do a loop to loop, and just slide that right down to our knot. You do that another time here, and now you're drop shot nymphing. And the drop shot nymphing, when you have those tags in, you got to remember they're at an angle. And they're coming at the fish at an angle like that, at depth. So you can lower or raise that angle with your rod tip depending on the depth of the river. And the key to drop shot nymphing is having that line straight at all times. And we'll get more involved in that when we get on the river in volume 2. So to remove a fly and change flies, you simply take your nippers and cut it off, cut your fly off, put your fly away, take the one that you want out and put it through like this. Tie it on like that, put it through, slide it down, and you're drop shot nymphing. So there's basically 2 ways to set up your leader. The simple way to drop shot nymph, we're using 6-pound or 8-pound fluorocarbon. One system is you tie in a triple surgeon's knot and remove the bottom tag, leaving the upper tag to tie on your fly. You tie your 2 flies on and you're ready to go. The other system is you cut both tags off, leaving 2 triple surgeon's knot, and then you add your flies on as you wish. However you do it, both systems work really well. One's not better than the other. The benefit of this is you can pre-tie these leaders, and what we do is we maybe tie up 3 or 4 of these and we just roll them up like this. Put them in a little plastic bag and put them in your vest. Now should you lose your flies on the river, instead of having to tie all these knots, you just whip out your next one, your leader out, and do a quick loop to loop onto your leader and you're ready to go. So it's not complicated, it's fairly easy. I would not recommend that you pre-tie a bunch of looped tag-ins like some guys do, because you're going to stretch that knot out. Work the perfection loop. Learn how to tie that perfection loop really well. It's one of the simplest knots to learn, and you can do that. You can do that perfection loop right on the river. So when changing flies or adding flies, simply tie the fly on first, then do your loop, and you're ready to go. All forms of nymphing have 2 things in common. One's the cast, which we're going to get quite involved with and on the river in video too, and having the fly on the bottom. And what makes drop shot nymphing better than most forms, or what makes it very effective, is the lead's at the rear of the leader. And lead's pretty important because it's the second thing that everything has in common, is the fly has to be on the bottom, and lead allows us to do that. So we talk about lead, there's basically only two types of lead that you need. That would be a 3/0 split shot or a BB size split shot. And it's important that you adjust the size of the split shot that you need so that you can move your fly slightly faster than the current, and you can actually feel the lead as it bounces along the rocks. So if anything gets caught in the rocks, it'll be the lead or your tungsten beads, or whatever you're using as a lead down there. So lead's really important, and you want to have that lead put on 8 inches below your last fly. In this case, in this scenario, that's an inline fly. And then I have my lead, however much lead you need. Now, if you're in a really fast moving water, you have to make sure that you have enough lead to get you down there. And on the contrary, if you're in really smooth or slow current rivers or situations, then you want to appropriately remove lead to make that drift slightly faster than the current, and then 3 inches left over where you cut your trim off. Now, lead or split shot is a round sphere, and when you put something round at the end of a piece of monofilament, and we're casting it, it has a certain amount of centrifugal force, a G-force to it. And what happens with this lead, over a period of time, it has a tendency to slip farther and farther and farther down to finally you cast that lead off. And that's what the biggest complaint I get about drop shot nymphing is I lose a lot of lead. Well, you don't have to lose a lot of lead. If you think about this from a more cerebral standpoint, lead is a round sphere, and as it's bouncing in around rocks, it's going in and out and down, and it gets caught, and it's not very hydrodynamic, and it slides off. What many anglers do is they tie a knot at the end of their lead right here so that the lead won't slip off. But you want your lead to slip off. If your lead gets caught in the rocks, you want it to come off. The last thing you want to do is break off your leader at the very top because your lead's stuck on the bottom. The drop shot system is designed for the lead to be slipped off. So what we do to prevent that and to give you a better feel on the water is we take that sphere or that round split shot and we smash it flat. And that does two things to your lead. It makes it hydrodynamic, where now it's no longer sliding down the rocks, it's moving through the river, so it has a nice little hydro flare to it. The second thing it does is it really mashes hard onto your monofilament, and it resists that centrifugal force of your cast going forward. So the combination of those two things will keep your lead on there longer and keep that fly drifting really nice through the current. Okay, flies. You can't fly fish without flies. What kind of flies do I need, Mike? Well, I would recommend that you don't use a beaded fly. Beads have a tendency to sink, and we want our fly to be moving a little bit, and beads will sometimes bring the fly down and get tangled up. It's okay to use beaded flies on drop shopping rigs, and it will work for you. So don't go out and buy a bunch of new flies. But when you have a choice, it works better if you don't use beaded flies. Unfortunately today, when you go to fly shops, a lot of fly shops don't have nymphs without beads anymore. So really, when we talk about flies, we want to have a standard. Much of what a trout eats during the season are mayflies and caddisflies throughout the season, certainly on the surface and subsurface. So they're accustomed to seeing those flies. So I like to use at least a rock worm or a Caddis Pupa imitation. We have some here that we'll show you on camera. And then I like to use a mayfly imitation. A pheasant tail works really well. And then the third fly is I like to use the big fly, the stoneflies. And those are the flies that I like to use on water where there's lots and lots of stoneflies. Here in Boise, Idaho, we have a river real close by called the South Fork of the Boise River. There's 6 or 7 different varieties of stoneflies in that river, and the trout really know what a stonefly is. So when you think about these things, you have to think about fly fishing from a logical standpoint. Everything in fly fishing is logical. The most logical thing for me to do is put a stonefly on. And those fish will eat them whenever they can find them. So I'm going to add a stonefly. What I don't want is a big stonefly with a bead on it hanging up here, because it's just going to tangle things up. So I like to use a big rubber leg, probably about a size, probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches long. Or longer, and I always want to put that as my inline fly. When I'm in rivers where I don't have very many stoneflies, then I might want to put a third dropper in. One of the best brown trout fisheries in America is the Wahi River. There's only 1 or 2 stoneflies in that river, and they're not very active to begin with. So I will actually use 3 drop flies and not an inline fly. So the disadvantage of an inline fly is that you can't change an inline fly. You have to put a whole new leader on in order to put that fly or change that fly. So flies in themselves, you have to think from a logical standpoint. If you're going to a river that you're not familiar with, a good strategy is stick with what works, and that's either a caddis nymph or a caddis pupa or a mayfly nymph. That would be standard if I'm going to a river where I don't know much about it. And then the third fly I might want to put on a midge or even a worm. If I'm going to a river I'm really familiar with and I understand that the trout or I can get to a fly shop who can help me, then I'll certainly do that. But making sure you have the right combination of flies works very well. If you're going with fly fishing with a partner who's drop shot nymphing, then you certainly don't want to be using the flies they're using. You want to try something different so you can find that magic fly that's working. But by and by, stick with an unbeaded nymph if you have them. Use a bead if you have them. Don't be afraid to use big flies as long as you put them at the bottom. And by all means, you have to keep these flies moving through the surface column just slightly faster than the current. Okay, we've discussed how we build these leaders. We've discussed drop shot nymphing, how effective it is. We've discussed the dynamics of how this is presented to the fish. We've gone into detail about the knots we use, the diagrams, how it's all built, how you should have this on hand. We've talked about weight, lead. We've talked about strategy, and we've talked about flies. It's a lot to take in from an educational standpoint, but really in order for us to tie this really in, we need to go to the river and actually see how it's done. So Volume 2 of Drop Shot Nymphing will take you down to the river and we'll work through all these problems together on the river so that you can see how it's done on the river.